Following in the footsteps of Saudi Arabia, the other Gulf countries are now pulling their observers out of Syria and are calling on the UN Security Council to step in. So has the Arab League mission in Syria failed? And what would it mean if the crisis in this country is internationalized? This is Inside Story. Hello again, I'm James Bays. The 6 Gulf monarchies have pulled their observers from Syria. The announcement came as the Gulf Cooperation Council said Syria had failed to implement Arab League decisions and had failed to stop its violent crackdown, which has now been going on for 10 months. Qatar's Prime Minister Sheikh bin Jassim Al Thani warned Syria that the failure of the government to step down would lead to UN involvement. This latest move comes days after the Arab League extended its monitoring mission in Syria for another month, but that mission now seems doomed. The latest move by the Arab League was harshly criticised by the Syrian government. This is what their foreign minister had to say.
I believe that at this point and this new phase of their conspiracy and plot against Syria is a provocation to bring the matter into the international circles.
So has the Arab League's mission in Syria failed? That's our question of the day. To discuss this, we're joined by our panel of guests. From London, we have Dr. Wael Aleji. He's a member of the General Commission for the Syrian Revolution. From Doha, Salman, Sheikh, director of the Brookings Doha Centre. And on the line from Damascus, Thabet, Salem, a veteran Syrian journalist and political commentator. Thank you all for joining us. Can I put that question, the question of the day, to you, Wael, in London? Has the Arab League mission failed?
I was expecting that to happen. I think that the Arab League and particularly the GCC had hoped that the regime will listen at some point and do something to stop this bloodshed and stop this chain of lies about groups of terrorists and armed groups.
Do you think it achieved anything? Do you think it achieved anything in nearly a month?
I don't think that they have achieved anything apart from covering up for the regime to continue its crimes, and they buy time for the regime to continue this bloodshed, and they have been delaying taking the Syrian issue to UN, which is the main demand of the civilian protesters on the ground.
OK, I want to get the views of Salman Sheikh here in Doha. I know you follow the Arab League very closely. The 6 member countries of the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, have pulled out their monitors. That, I think, leaves 15 other Arab League members. Are they going to go on with this mission, do you think?
I very much doubt it. I think they're having a meeting later on today or tomorrow, I think, with the 55 members of the GCC. And most importantly, the money and the power that comes from the GCC countries like Saudi Arabia and Qatar. I very much doubt that we'll have any appetite to continue with a mission which was deeply flawed right from the start. It didn't have the right competency. It didn't have the right cooperation or level of independence from the Syrian authorities. It didn't have free and unfettered access, and as a result it's really struggled, and it didn't have the right security. So I presume they will come to a natural conclusion that we can't carry on with this mission any longer, and perhaps hold out the hope of a more robust international observer mission which is properly resourced and with a proper mandate in the future.
Thabet, Salem, I'd like your view on this. The other 2 guests are saying that the Arab League mission was a failure. Do you agree?
Well, of course I do agree, for 2 reasons. First, well, we have to admit here, we don't know, we can't speculate. Maybe the death toll among the civilians could have been much higher if the observers were not there. I'm not sure. But there is a well-established fact that the average was about 30 were killed a day. So this means that the observers have failed to fulfill their task. That's one thing. The other thing is the report presented by by Marshal Dabi, I think, was unbalanced to the extent that it angered not only the Syrian people, but also the Gulf countries. So within this frame, I think the mission has failed and has collapsed.
Wael in London, can I ask you about one of those points that Thabet just made? He said that the death toll may have been reduced by the Arab League mission. Do you think it achieved at least that?
I completely disagree. Only yesterday, at least 33 have been killed. A few days earlier, at least 110 people were killed. So clearly, they failed to reduce the death toll. So this mission is a complete failure. This mission was controversial since the beginning, especially with the appointing of General Dabi as head of this mission, who is himself a controversial person. There are strong allegations that he was involved in Darfur massacres, and he was involved in covering up for the Sudani regime and the Sudani president, who is himself wanted for the ICC.
Salman, Sheikh, do you think that the Arab League should be embarrassed about the way that this mission was carried out? Do you think it is an embarrassment to them?
Well, certainly I think you should review very seriously how this mission was put together and how it conducted itself. But I think we should give it credit for at least trying to open up the space inside Syria. There's an absolute crying need to bear witness with what is going on and to have independent verification of it. I believe, though, that the Arab League has made the right decision to put forward now a political track and to make the Arab League mission a much smaller part of a much bigger effort to try and find a solution which is focused on a post-Assad transition in Syria.
Yes, well, I'd like you to explain to us exactly what the Arab League now have on the table, because my understanding is there are two parts to it. There is a new plan that Syria has already rejected, and they then want to take that new plan to the UN. We'll discuss the UN element a little later, but tell us what the new plan that they'd like to see in place, what that is.
Yes, the new plan essentially focuses, as you said, on two things. Most significantly, it's talking about a transition to a post-Assad Syria. It's talking about a national unity government, which then delivers a constituent assembly and a new constitution. And if that does not work, or even to get support for it, it is now put in a request for the Security Council, the UN Security Council, to approve the plan. And already we see that the Secretary General of the Arab League is being invited to brief the UN Security Council, and that may well happen even as early as this week.
OK, Wael in London, can I ask you, you represent one branch of the opposition. Would you, the opposition, would you support this new plan?
I think this plan is doomed. It is dead before it was born.
Why?
The Syrian regime rejected it completely. So I think it would be a waste of time to talk about it and discuss it. I believe that the UN is the only organization that has the experience, the expertise, and the means to deal with the Syrian issue, to find solutions and to enforce them.
Thabet Salem in Damascus, can you tell us how this new plan has been greeted there? We've heard what the government in Damascus has said, but what do people on the streets there in the Syrian capital say about this idea of Assad stepping down, some sort of national unity government, bringing Syria towards elections?
Well, let me tell you, 2 days ago I wrote, even on the eve of the publishing of the report, I wrote an article. And I anticipated, I expected what the Syrian government was going to say, and it said exactly what I anticipated, that it is an intervention in the internal affairs, the initiative is being taken care of by the president himself, he's doing this and that, so all old sayings which we know. The idea is, I think, the very important thing about this this new initiative, which is one way or another similar to the old one, is that it is it will be delivered to the Security Council members, and it's approved by the Arab League. In this case, the country that's objecting to any veto, to any resolution regarding what's happening in Syria is Russia. I think Russia now is squeezed in the corner because it can't reject something approved by the Arab League. One way or another, they have to at least to stay silent. This is where the Arab League has succeeded in internationalizing and bringing this initiative to the international law.
Thabet, we'll come to the international dimension a little later, but you're there on the ground in Damascus, and the thing that's very hard to get to in this story, because there's very little independent reporting, is a key fact, and I want to ask you your view on this. How many people, what percentage of the Syrian population still support President Assad? Do you have a clear idea of that?
This is very difficult to tell, but because the circumstances are not normal. If life is normal and when people can speak up their mind, I think he wouldn't get the majority, especially after what has happened. So, of course, it needs polls, it needs research, etc.
I'm going to ask you, though, to make a guess. What percentage do you think support Assad right now?
Well, I would say between 30 to 35. That's the maximum. I'm not sure. That's in my own viewpoint. But nevertheless, I can't say. It's very difficult, to speculate.
No, but it's useful to speak to someone who's there on the ground in Damascus to give us this information, because it's very hard for those of us journalists who aren't allowed into Syria to find this out for ourselves. Can I ask you your view on that point, Wael in London?
I think it's very difficult to predict in the absence of democracy and any surveys, independent surveys. I think, yes, it's very, very difficult to predict. However, I think that his supporters would not exceed 10%.
Salman, Sheikh here in Doha. I want to ask you about another aspect of this, which is the Arab League sanctions. They were all discussed before. They are now in place, you believe?
Well, as far as they could be. It was always going to be difficult to have a perfect sanctions regime imposed on Syria, especially given the nervousness of some of Syria's neighbors. But we are seeing independent and bilateral efforts to impose those sanctions. What's most important about those sanctions is that the Arab League actually passed that resolution. It has a more demonstrative political effect, I believe, aimed at trying to convince those who are perhaps wavering and want to move away from the regime that this is the time to do so. And James, if I may, just to comment on your last question as well, the numbers you've heard from our other two guests, but I would say the question I think many people are probably asking is, does President Assad have the solution to what's going on in Syria? And I suspect that the number to that would be a very, very big no from the majority, overwhelming majority of the population. This is something I think we have to bear in mind.
Salman, if I can stay with you and ask you about the Arab League and the dynamics of what are going on around the Arab League table, and actually also the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council. It seems that Saudi Arabia now, for the first time, is trying to take the lead.
That's absolutely right. That is a very big story. Saudi Arabia, which usually stays in the background, which prefers containment and containment of regional threats, has now decided, after working, I think, pretty intensively behind the scenes, it's the time to move forward. And I think together with its partnership with other GCC states, notably Qatar, it is now moving much more aggressively forward in trying to bring about a political change in Syria.
I know they're on the same side, Qatar and Saudi Arabia, but Salman, is there a bit of rivalry between those two?
No, I think I didn't hear you very well, but I think what you're saying, yes, there is, I think, a very close and active cooperation between those two, and it has been so for the past few months. We're only seeing it more visibly now as a result of the Saudi actions.
Wael in London, do you think Saudi leadership is important and changes things?
I do think that it's crucial. I think that any potential intervention will be a failure without the support of the Gulf countries, mainly Saudi Arabia and Qatar. We have to take into consideration that any potential international intervention will cost a lot, and taking into account that Syria has no oil, so somebody else has to offer to pay the costs of any potential humanitarian aid or any other kind of intervention. So yes, I do believe that the role of Saudi and Qatar is very important. However, we have before thinking of any plan or resolution, we have to understand the structure of the Syrian regime. We use regime as a term, but actually it is not a regime. It is a group of, I would say that it's a coalition of few families related to each other, and those families control everything in Syria. They control politics, they control the army, they control the security agencies, they control everything. And they hold a tight grip on security forces, and therefore they have the mentality of mafia. They are a bunch of gangsters. They don't know politics, they don't speak politics, so we have to take this mentality into account.
Well, you say they are gangsters, but they've managed to rule Syria for more than 40 years. Now, talking of the Gulf states as we were, they've also...
With the blood and tears, and torture.
Right. Well, let's just move on our discussion now, Wael. The Gulf states have also said they're going to take part in a high-level Arab delegation that will visit Russia to press Moscow to end its support for Bashar al-Assad's regime. And elements in Russia appear to be recognising the situation in Syria is changing. Mikhail Margalov, a presidential envoy, said the Syrian leadership still believes it can finish off the opposition, which in fact is hastening the transformation of this conflict into a full-scale civil war. He went on to say, today we must recognise the Syrian situation is in a deadlock. Salman, Sheikh, if I can ask you about that, do you see a difference in the Russian position? And as this thing moves from the Arab League to the UN, could that be significant?
Well, Margalov also said in his quotes over the last day or so that Russia hasn't received a clear positive response from Assad, and that its veto, which it used before, may well be exhausted as an instrument. These are very significant statements. It may well be showing that the Russians are beginning to think how to move forward in a different way. And as a result, I think the GCC mission to Russia is extremely important, where I think they will be discussing the political horizon of the Arab League as laid out, but also perhaps an economic horizon with the Russians themselves and their interests in the Middle East. Margalov is a very respected, sober, influential foreign policy thinker in amongst the Russian leadership elite. So his statements, I think, we have to take very seriously.
Thabet in Damascus, this is all going to worry President Assad, isn't it, if he's likely to be or could be ditched by his main backers, the Russians?
Of course, I think this is the only card left. If he loses this card, then it's finished. Anyway, I don't see any foreign intervention for the time being, and this has been explicitly said by the British Foreign Minister the other day. So I can't see. I mean, sometimes our position, which is especially those like my friends in London, they think it's the West is ready to interfere. I don't think they are ready. And maybe there are views regarding the militarization of the Syrian revolution itself. Is it leading it positively or negatively? There are views regarding this, but the only thing that, to me, that's very clear is that the West will never interfere in Syria. So we don't have to build hopes, big hopes, and which will be dashed soon. I think it's the task of the Syrians inside to carry on with their peaceful movement, working very hard to achieve their goals. Because, and again, I don't think that the majority of Syrians want to see their country destroyed by NATO or Iraq as an example, maybe Libya. What we want is a radical change to finish with this regime. That's all accepted. But at what cost? It's not at the cost of the destruction of the country. This is very dangerous. And I think here we have to be very prudent and very logical and to work politically, fine, to pressure the regime to give in, but not to leave it to a mystical and unrealistic solution which will never be achieved in the sense that we ask for the military help of the West. If politically Russia will change, I think it will be more balanced in this case, and we are doomed to find a political solution which what we want is a change.
Okay, let me ask Wael in London about that. Do you think it's possible that the Arab League plan that they now have in place, calling on Assad to step down, give power to his deputy and have a national unity government, that could form the basis of a new UN resolution which might get Russian support?
I don't think so. I don't think so. As I said before, the people who are in power don't understand politics and they don't talk politics. Therefore, any negotiations with them would be a complete waste of time because they do believe in complete power, in absolute power. And they believe that they inherited this power and they want to stay they want to stay in power for as long as they could and pass it on to their children. That's their main goal. So
Salman,
I can't
Sheikh,
see
can I ask you about that and about Russia's view at the UN? If Russia doesn't change its position and a new resolution doesn't get Russian support, what are the other possibilities? What's the end game here?
Well, if the Russians don't change and we don't have an international consensus on how to move forward, which crucially is all about a post-Assad transition in Syria, I'm afraid we're going to descend further and further into violence and a militarized conflict in Syria. Syria is an access nation. If that is the case, then we will start to see the divisions within the international community translate themselves both inside Syria and regionally. This would be a very, very poor scenario. I hope, actually, that the Russians will come on board and that an international consensus can be forged, which does lead to a political solution. I have a lot of sympathy with what Wael is saying regarding the nature of the Assad family cabal or clan. And we have to be realistic that they will not sign on to a political solution. But first and foremost, we do need an international consensus that is confronting them.
Okay, Wael, I'd like to ask you quickly, can you see a way out of this without yet more bloodshed?
Well, I think that the Russians are very frustrated and disappointed, and I think that they have reached a point at which they realize that they are hitting a brick wall with the Syrian regime. The statement of Mr. Margilov, the recent statement of Mr. Margilov gives us a strong hint that the Russians are ready now to change their position. And I believe that they are just trying to maximize the price that they would be paid for any change in their position.
Thank you to our guests in London, Dr. Wael Aleji, in Doha, Salman, Sheikh, and on the phone in Damascus, Thabet, Salem. And thanks very much to you for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. Really want to know what you think about the situation in Syria. Just email your thoughts and comments to us, insidestory@aljazeera.net. What should we discuss next time? Again, it's insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in 24 hours' time. Bye-bye now.